Today we bring 3 scary school lockdown story with 3 lockdowns, 3 schools. 3 things that were never supposed to be inside the building with them. One of these stories has a police report attached to it with a name that was never identified. One of them ends with a head count that still doesn't add up. And one of them, the school won't talk about to this day. If you've ever sat in a dark classroom during a drill, phone on silent, praying you don't hear footsteps outside the door, this is... I was in 9th grade, 13 years old, and this was the first real lockdown of my life. Not a drill. The real thing. It started as an unremarkable Tuesday morning, 2nd period, general science. Our regular teacher, Mrs. Aldrich, was out that day, which meant we had a substitute, someone none of us had ever seen before. She didn't introduce herself when she walked in. She didn't take attendance out loud like most subs did. She wrote her name on the whiteboard in small, tight handwriting, sat down at the desk, and didn't say another word. I want to walk you through everything that felt off about her before anything even happened, because looking back, I think we all felt it and just didn't have the vocabulary yet to explain why. She kept her coat on the entire class, even though the room ran warm most mornings. She never once made eye contact with any of us. Not when kids asked questions, not when someone dropped a textbook loudly enough to make half the class jump. She sat facing the door the entire time, not the class. The door like she was waiting for something to happen. About 20 minutes into class, the intercom clicked on. We had all sat through fire drills and lockdown drills plenty of times, so at first nobody even looked up from their desks. But this time the tone in the principal's voice was different. It wasn't the calm, practiced script from the drills. His voice was shaking, clipped, like he was trying hard to keep it together and mostly failing. He said this was not a drill, that all staff and students needed to initiate lockdown procedures immediately. Lock doors, lights off, away from windows and doors. Here's the part that still bothers me more than anything else that happened that day. Before any of us had even processed what was happening, before our regular teacher would have even had time to think, the substitute was already standing. She walked straight to the door and locked it, no hesitation, no confusion, like she'd done it 100 times in that exact room. She flipped the lights off herself. Then she sat back down, facing the door again, and didn't say a single word for the rest of the lockdown. We sat there in that dark room for almost 40 minutes. In that time, a few of us texted parents. A couple of kids near the back were crying quietly. The substitute never moved, never whispered instructions, never tried to comfort anyone the way you'd expect an adult in the room to at least attempt. She just watched the door. At one point, about 15 minutes in, we heard something in the hallway. Slow footsteps, not running, not pounding, just an unhurried, steady pace, moving down the hall outside our room. They stopped directly outside our door. The substitute stood up again. She walked to the door, and for a second I genuinely thought she was going to open it. Instead, she pressed her palm flat against the door and just stood there, completely still for what felt like a full minute. The footsteps outside eventually moved on. When the lockdown finally lifted, we found out through the news later that day that a man had been reported on campus near the gymnasium carrying what a witness described as a weapon. Security and police swept the entire building floor by floor and never found him. No one matching that description was seen leaving the property either. What always stuck with me is how the substitute acted like she already knew what was about to happen, seconds before the announcement even played. When I got home that day and told my mom about the strange substitute who locked the door before we were even told to, she called the school the next morning to find out who she was and thank her for staying so calm under pressure. The school told her there was no substitute teacher assigned to my science class that day. No name, no record, nothing in the system. When my mom pushed back and said I was very clearly describing an adult who had been standing in front of our class for over an hour, the office simply repeated that there was no record of anyone being assigned to that room. I never saw her again. Her name is still, to this day, written in my old notebook from that class, because I copied it down out of habit before I even knew anything was wrong. I've looked it up more times than I'd like to admit. It's never led anywhere. This one happened during my senior year, in a portable classroom set up behind the main building. If your school ever had those trailer-style classrooms out on the edge of the property, you know exactly what I'm talking about. They're not wired into the school's main systems the same way the main building is. Different intercom hookup, different alarm wiring, sometimes a noticeable lag on anything coming from the front office. That day, the lockdown alert came through on our teacher's radio rather than a loud intercom announcement, because our portable didn't get the same audio feed as the rest of campus. Our teacher, Miss Okafor, went pale the second she heard it come through, and told us in a low, controlled voice to kill the lights and get into the corner farthest from the door, fast and quiet. We sat crammed into that corner for what felt like an eternity, though it was probably closer to 10 minutes before anything happened. At some point, one of the guys near the back, Devin, whispered that he could hear something moving in the vent above the supply closet. A few people told him to shut up, understandably, because nobody wanted to think about anything else right then. Then we all heard it. A slow, scraping sound moving steadily across the length of the ceiling, directly above where the 20 of us were huddled together. It stopped right above us. For a second, nothing. Then it started tapping. 3 taps, a pause, 3 taps again, over and over, evenly spaced, deliberate, like something was trying to get our attention on purpose rather than just moving around randomly. Ms. Okafor, who had been calm and controlled up to that point, visibly changed. She reached over and grabbed the leg of a nearby desk, gripping it like she was preparing to use it if she had to. I had never seen a teacher look actually afraid before that moment, and it made the whole situation feel 100 times worse because up until then, some small part of me had been holding onto the idea that the adult in the room would know this was nothing. The tapping continued on and off for almost the entire lockdown, sometimes stopping for a few minutes before starting again, always in that same steady 3-tap pattern, always directly above the same spot. A couple of the younger kids started crying. Devin, the one who first noticed it, kept whispering that it sounded like it was trying to count us because the tapping pattern seemed to shift slightly whenever someone shifted position or made noise, almost like it was reacting. When the all clear finally came and the lockdown lifted, maintenance was called out that same afternoon to check the vent system above our portable, because several other students in different portables reported hearing similar sounds. What they found, according to what Ms. Okafor told us the next day, was nothing. No animal, no damage, no gap large enough for anything to have physically moved through that ductwork. The vent system in those portables, we later learned, was barely large enough for a squirrel to squeeze through, let alone anything that could produce a deliberate, evenly spaced tapping pattern that seemed to respond to sound in the room below it. The school's official explanation, given briefly and without much elaboration, was that the sound was likely settling metal ductwork reacting to a temperature change, a common enough occurrence, they said, especially in older portable units. Nobody who was in that room that day believes that explanation, including Ms. Okafor, who I ran into years later at a grocery store, and who brought the story up herself before I even had a chance to. She told me she still thinks about that tapping sometimes late at night. She said the thing that never sat right with her wasn't the sound itself, but how much it felt like it knew exactly where we were. This is the one that stays with me the most because it's the one nobody, including the school itself, has ever been able to explain. I wasn't a student during this lockdown. I was a teacher's aide, 22 years old, working part-time while finishing my degree, helping out in a 10th grade history classroom during my school's version of a modified lockdown drill that turned real about halfway through. Standard procedure during any lockdown drill or reel was to do a head count and radio it into the front office as soon as the room was secured. It's a simple task. You count the students physically present in the room, you compare that number to the attendance roster for that period, and you radio in either a match or a discrepancy. That day we had 22 students scheduled for that period based on the roster. I did the head count. I counted 23. I assumed I'd miscounted, which happens easily enough when you're nervous and counting people who are crouched down or partially behind furniture. I counted again, slower this time, pointing at each student individually as I went. 23. My supervising teacher, Mr. Castellano, did his own count independently, without me telling him my number first, because that's standard practice, to avoid one person's mistake influencing the other. He got 23 as well. We looked around the room, trying to figure out who the extra student was, because in a class that size you generally know every face even if you don't know every name well. Nobody in the room could point to a single student who didn't belong. Every student present, when we went through the roster out loud in a whisper, was accounted for by name, matched to a face we recognized, and the count still came back to 23. One more than the roster said should have been possible. One more than every single name we could account for. We radioed the discrepancy in to the front office anyway, exactly as we were trained to do, and were told to keep everyone seated, quiet, and secure until further instruction, same as every other classroom. For the rest of the lockdown, which lasted a little over half an hour, that number stuck with me more than anything else happening around us. I found myself scanning the room over and over, trying to catch some detail I'd missed. Some students sitting slightly separated from the group who somehow didn't register as part of the initial count. I never found one. Every time I counted, I landed on 23. And every time I tried to match names to faces, I landed on 22 accounted for. About 10 minutes before the lockdown lifted, I did one final count out of nerves more than procedure at that point. 22. Just 22, the correct number. Matching the roster exactly, like it had been that way the entire time. When the lockdown ended and we compared notes with the front office as part of the standard post-incident debrief, there was no record anywhere of an additional student being assigned to that room. No visitor log entry, no note about a transfer student sitting in. Nothing that would explain the extra body Mr. Castellano and I both counted independently, twice each, during the most stressful 30 minutes of that entire day. Mr. Castellano, to his credit, has always maintained that it was simply a counting error brought on by stress and poor lighting, that these things happen more often than people think during high-pressure situations, and that two people making the same mistake independently isn't as rare as it sounds when both people are frightened and working off the same visual chaos. I want to believe that. I've tried to believe that for years now. But I have done head counts in that exact classroom, under normal circumstances, dozens of times before that day and dozens of times after it, and I have never miscounted before or since, not once, not even close. Whatever that extra body was that day, it was there for the exact duration of the lockdown, and it was gone the moment the danger, whatever it actually was, had passed. Lockdowns are supposed to be about keeping something dangerous out of the building. These three stories make you wonder if sometimes, for whatever reason, it's already in the room with everyone else. If any of you have your own lockdown story that never got a real explanation, I want to hear it in the comments below. Stories like these are exactly why this channel exists. If this video got to you, subscribe, because there's a lot more like it coming, and turn on